A cold wind slips between old pines, and if you listen closely, you can hear it whisper, "You won't believe what's hiding out here." Because North America has creatures, 10 of them, that generations swore were real enough to fear, real enough to warn their children about, and real enough to keep people from wandering too far into the dark. And before you decide these are just campfire fantasies, here's a hint you'll want to hold on to. Every one of these legends started with someone absolutely convinced they saw something no human should ever see. Some stories cling to remote communities like a shadow, and none is darker than the Wendigo. People described it as hunger-given shape, a towering skeletal being that stalks winter forests. The part people always leave out. It wasn't just a monster, it was a warning. Elders used the tale to teach their people the consequences of greed and desperation during harsh winters. And the terrifying hook here is this. Almost every Wendigo story begins the same way. Someone disappearing after claiming they heard their name called by a voice that sounded just like a loved one. If the forest could talk, they'd probably tell you to ignore the voices calling from between the trees. But if the Wendigo kept people inside, the Thunderbird kept them watching the skies. Tribes spoke of a colossal bird that created thunder with each beat of its wings. And while you might write that off as myth, there's a twist that always gets people leaning in. There are set as journals, actual written accounts, describing a bird so big it carried away full-grown deer. These were men who built their lives around facts they could hunt, sell, or trade. So imagine their shock writing about a creature whose wingspan they claimed blotted the sun. Meanwhile, in the depths of the American South, the Rougarou waited in the swamps, a creature with the head of a wolf and the body of a man. Parents in Louisiana used the story to keep children from wandering near the water. But what makes this legend so gripping is how many variations there are. Some say it was a cursed person. Others swear it hunted those who broke sacred rules. And the strangest part? Every version includes one detail that feels too specific to be random. The Rougarou never attacks right away. It watches first, for hours, sometimes days, long enough for the victim to sense something's wrong without ever seeing eyes staring through the reeds. The same can't be said for the Jersey Devil. That one? People claim they saw it flying overhead, a bizarre, bat-winged, goat-headed creature screaming above the treetops. And while it sounds like the kind of story kids dare each other to investigate at night, the unsettling hook is that the legend came from a specific address, in a real home, involving a real family. Locals insisted the creature was born to a woman who cursed her own child. But the detail storytellers love the most is that sightings didn't stop with the 1700s. They kept happening. Even police officers in the early 1900s reported strange tracks they couldn't identify. If a myth survives centuries, you have to wonder whether it's actually a myth. Then there's Bigfoot, maybe the most famous of them all. But here's something people rarely acknowledge. Indigenous tribes had Bigfoot stories long before footprints, grainy videos, and late-night documentaries. These early stories didn't portray him as a joke, but as a guardian, a wanderer who lived just close enough to humans to watch, but not close enough to join. And it's that dual nature, both feared and respected, that gave Bigfoot its staying power. If you've ever walked alone through thick forest, you know the feeling of being watched even when you can't prove it. Bigfoot stories don't try to terrify you with claws or teeth. Just the idea that someone is out there, much larger, much smarter, and much more aware of you than you are of it. Travel west and you'll meet the Chupacabra. Yes, it's modern compared to others, but its roots stretch into North American folklore just the same. Ranchers found livestock drained of blood, punctured wounds along the neck, and tracks that didn't match coyotes or wild dogs. People assumed predators at first, but it's hard to call it just a predator when the remains looked almost surgically altered. The hook most people latch onto? Witnesses didn't describe a single type of creature. They described two. One reptilian, one canine. Yet all the attacks looked eerily consistent. It's the kind of mystery that makes even skeptics stay up an hour later than they planned. Of course, northern lakes have secrets too, and none is as chilling as the Ogopogo. Families along the shores of British Columbia passed down warnings about a serpentine creature living beneath the surface. But the unsettling part isn't the shape of the creature, it's the pattern of the sightings. In many accounts, people claimed the water went still just before it surfaced. No birds, no ripples, just absolute, unnatural silence, like the lake itself was holding its breath. And anyone who spent time in the wilderness knows that silence is always the moment before something happens. Then there's skinwalkers, creatures from Navajo tradition. These are shapeshifters tied to dark rituals, often described as people who traded humanity for power. What captivates audiences is the uncanny valley aspect. Creatures that look almost human, but not quite. Almost animal, but wrong in ways people struggle to describe. And regardless of who tells the story, there's one rule everyone repeats. Don't say their name at night. You don't warn people about something unless there's a reason. Further north, the Kushtaka haunted Alaskan coastlines. Tricksters that could mimic voices, lure travelers, and lead them to icy deaths. Unlike many cryptids meant purely to scare, this one served a cultural purpose. It taught people to respect the environment, the ocean, and the cold. But the eerie part is how often mimicry appears in these stories. It's always the same setup. Someone hears a familiar voice calling for help. They follow, they vanish. Warnings like that don't survive for generations unless something happened often enough to cement the fear. And finally, we end with the Hopkinsville goblins, those strange, luminous-eyed beings reported during a night-long siege on a Kentucky farmhouse. The detail that keeps this legend alive? There were multiple witnesses, multiple adults, all describing the same thing. Creatures that floated rather than walked, that never seemed to retreat, even when shot at. Whether the event was a misunderstanding or something no one could fully explain, the story stands as one of the strangest collective encounters in folklore. And believers always point to one chilling truth. Groups rarely hallucinate the same thing at the same time. 10 creatures, 10 origins, 10 reasons people still look over their shoulders when the woods get too quiet or the sky grows too dark. And here's the real hook. Folklore doesn't survive because it entertains us. It survives because at some point someone believed it was true, and they wanted to make sure the next person stayed alive long enough to tell the story all over again.